everyone. Welcome back again to Franchise Vibes. And I'm super excited that we decided to end. This will be our last video for the year. So I'm happy we went through a whole year. Thank you for all of those who have stuck it through. And if you haven't seen every video, go back because there's a lot of great information. So I'm excited because we have a treat today. We have Frank from our friends over at SMB. If you guys remembered, on our item 19 call, we had George. So our friends are back, and this time the vibes we're on is expansion vibes. And we're going to be talking about everything you need to know about franchising your business. So now we're talking about the other side. And why I'm glad that we're having this conversation. One, we haven't had this particular focus as yet. And I do feel like when I do help with the other side of the coin, which is franchising your business. And there's a lot of misconception when it comes to that as well. So I'm really looking forward to let's debunk those myths and let's really talk about how to do this thing right. And I would like to introduce you to our guest, Frank Closurdo.
Hey,
Frank, how are
TAMIKA.
you?
Thank you. Glad to be a part of it.
Thank you. Welcome to Franchise Vibes. And Frank, please tell us just a little bit more about yourself and your journey for becoming the Executive Director of Business Development for SMB Advisors.
TAMIKA, I've been around the block a little bit, but I don't have that traditional kind of franchising experience since I was 18 years old. I actually started out in healthcare. So I started out in more like pharmaceutical medical device. Started out in Michigan, where I was born, then moved to Long Island. So I became a New Yorker. And then here now moved into the Philadelphia area, and where I was largely learned my craft in marketing, largely with Johnson and Johnson. So some of you probably know from Band-Aid and Tylenol and things like that. That's where I learned my craft, and then I went through a variety of different companies, and then I decided, you know what, I'm done working for the corp. I want to jump off, and so I went to a small little startup where I was chief marketing officer. And then about 3 years later, I said, you know what, maybe I'm going to take one more jump and I'm going to decide to like go off on my own. And so I did. And about 5 years ago, the founder of SMB, franchise advisor, Steve Biegelman, came to me and said, listen, I've got an opening on my team. Would you like to join? I said, I don't know anything about franchising. He's like, we'll teach you. And I said, hey, maybe an old dog can learn some new tricks. That's what I did. And I got to tell you, the best part of this whole industry is helping those people become business owners and helping them achieve their dream. So whether you are someone who has worked for somebody else all your life and now you want to work for yourself and be your own boss, like in the case of like you are selling franchises to people, or in the case of a business that you've been running for so long and you just want to be able to like expand, but you just don't know how to do it. That's what we're here for. And so it's really just, I mean, we all know this. The key to wealth and the key to opportunity is really forging your own path, not working for somebody else. And so many people want that dream, and it's wonderful to be able to kind of help people achieve it.
Awesome. I agree. And I like that, forging your own path. So tell us, for those that are unfamiliar, and there are many, I tell you, there's people that, they think they know about franchising, but they really kind of don't, or, those that really think they do, so it's always that I'm not too sure. So those that are unfamiliar, could you explain what it really means to franchise your business?
Sure.
What does that process look like from a high level?
Well, first of all, let's start with step number one. You need to have a successful business that you're running today. So, and that can be any business, right? It can be a retail business, whether it's, food or restaurant or fitness or healthcare, childcare, senior care, anything, home services, that sort of thing. Whether it's a retail location or whether you're running out of your home, just demonstrate that you've got proven success of running that business and generating revenue. I usually say, you know what, you probably got to be, let's say 2+, 3+ years in business. Because let's face it, that first year, you're learning and you're trying to figure out ways to like generate the business. And the second year, you start to kick it in. And by that third year, you're like really humming and you're bringing in the revenue. So I would say usually about 1 to 3 years is minimum to be able to demonstrate your success. But it really can be any type of business. But I always say, here's a couple of things that you need to really hone in on. One, what is unique and different about your business? So, and I'm not talking about just, it's your grandmother's sauce recipe. because you're making a hell of a pizza. I'm not talking about that. I'm just like, what is kind of different about it, right? And so,
Right.
I mean, speaking of pizza, I use the example of Mod Pizza. Mod Pizza probably has like 2,000, 3,000 locations. And what it is it's one of those places that you go in and you make your own pizza. You pick your
Mm-hmm.
protein, you pick your cheese, you pick your vegetables, etc. And they come out, it's like a $30 pizza. But it's a new thing because they basically took the idea of making a pizza and twisted it and put a new twist on it, right? That you get to kind of pick your own toppings and pick your own protein and everything else, and
Mm-hmm.
crust and everything. So because of that, what's unique about your business, or anybody who's running a business? That's really important. What is it
Yeah.
different? How do you differentiate it from the competition? If you don't have a differentiator of why you stand out, you probably are not going to have an opportunity to really expand and be a franchise. Got to have something different. Even Chick-fil-A, right? I mean, let's
Mm-hmm.
be honest, Tamika. It's not a bad chicken sandwich. The waffle fries are pretty good, and I like the lemonade. But to be blunt, what does everybody remember going to Chick-fil-A?
Yeah. Their service. That's
Their
that.
service, that customer service, that experience, right? So that's what their differentiation is. That their special sauce, as we call it, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't always have to be a product per se.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It could be something else. Like Chick-fil-A has really taken customer service to a new level, right? So it's those kind of things that really just have to kind of define who you are as a business and what makes you different. That's really important.
Yeah. And these are some of the things that I run into as well. And I try to get them to understand it. And I simply say, okay, so in other words, why? Why would I want your business? Why me? You're telling me about your business. Why would I want to invest and own your business?
Right.
And maybe sometimes they kind of get it that way. So that unique factor is one of the key
Yep.
factors. Yeah. So thank you for that. So I guess expand a little bit more on that. I'm thinking about some of the misconceptions because I have seen quite a few. There's definitely a lot of misconceptions. I know of a couple myself that I've run into, such as I'll throw one out. Sometimes I've heard people that think that just because there's more than one location, they think it's a franchise. So then I'll have to come in and tell them, no, that doesn't mean it's a franchise. Just have an extra location, et cetera, et cetera. So tell me about some of the most common misunderstandings that you've come across when business owners think about franchising their brand.
In particular is people think that they might have to have 2, 3, 4 locations before they franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to say that like more is better or more is not necessary. That let's face it, the more proof you've got of your pudding, the better off, right? But if you have 1 or 2 locations, even one location, but it's something that's really different and stands out, don't think that you have to like open up a second or third location. If you've got a business that's a key differentiator that's unique and you're generating some substantial revenue, let's say north of $300,000 in sales, that or even higher is better, right? Higher is better in this case. Then you know what? Maybe it's an opportunity that you could franchise from that point on. So some people have that myth, to
Mm-hmm.
use the term, that I must have multiple locations before I can franchise. That's not the case.
Right.
We've made many brands into franchises that have only had one location, and they've become very successful.
Mm-hmm.
That's one myth. The other myth is that I'm going to build it and they will come.
Yeah.
God, wouldn't that be so lovely? It just doesn't work like that. And so just because you become a franchise, right? Just because you get your legal documents in place, you got your operating manual, like I'm all set, I'm ready to go. Boom. Put a sign outside, I'm selling franchises. And you think they're just going to run in like, you know, stop, get out of their Ubers and run in and buy one. It's not going to happen. Like you
Not
really
like
have to
that.
work at it. I always
Mm-hmm.
tell everybody too, is like, if you're looking at a short runway to become a franchisor, like 2 or 3 years, don't do it.
Right.
This is a 5 to 10 year kind of road or more, depending on how you put your plans together, the resources that you have, the business plan that you make. And so that's another myth too, is that I can do this in a couple of years and it'll just happen. No, I always tell everyone it's at least a 5 to 10 year journey, and it's blood, sweat, tears. You're probably going to work harder than you did running your corporate location, but you're going to work smarter
Mm-hmm.
because you're not going to be the guy or gal running the restaurant. You're not going to be making food. You're not going to be chipping in when somebody calls in sick. You're going to be elevating yourself to the franchisor level, and you're going to become a supporter, a mentor, a guider to these franchisees. And so it's not just about getting the pasta on the dish onto the table for that person to eat. This is
Mm-hmm.
now about helping those people, those franchisees, achieve their dream and become successful. And so you have to work through others. And I'll tell
Right.
you something, influencing others, because remember, they don't work for you. They're your franchisees, but they don't work for you. They're not their employees, right? So influencing others without that kind of authority per se, because you don't have that direct authority because they're not your employee, it's a whole new muscle that you got to exercise. But I will tell you, it's a great muscle because it is a skill set that you can apply so many different ways in life. But that's another buster, I would say, is that, I
Mhm.
think you can finish it all in a couple of years and I'll be done. And no, it's about a 10-year ride, a good ride.
Another one that I run into is people that think that they can start off as a franchise. They don't realize that there's actually a legally also a time period
Yes.
that needs to be, expanded first before
Yeah, that's
you.
that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, okay, I can just start selling it, I'll get somebody to open another location somewhere else. Like, no, that doesn't work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
as you and I know, and most of your listeners probably know and viewers too, is it's got the franchise industry is governed by the Federal Trade Commission.
Right.
So that FTC, yes, that's the federal government. And when we all laugh about this, right? Because we say when the government gets involved, there's good and there's bad. Bad is they comes down to get in your way. The good is, in this case, they've put rules, regulations, and compliance requirements in place that honestly safeguard you as a franchisor. And
Right.
that's actually a really good thing. But to your point, you can't just willy-nilly go out and sell a franchise. You have to put
Mm-hmm.
legal documents together. And so that's called a franchise disclosure document, which has everything in there. I mean, it's about 200 pages long. Everything in there from your startup costs to what your fee structure is going to be, to what your territory size is going to be, to an item 19, which we call as a financial representation. So when someone asks that ever popular question of how much money can I make, Tamika, you have a representation, not a guarantee, but a representation of how much someone can make. So you're right. And that legal process takes about, I would say, 3+ months to get done.
Mm-hmm.
Between the lawyer, ourselves, who actually help, you decide as the franchisor, or help you decide what those strategic decisions are that go into that document. So it takes
Mm-hmm.
about 3+ months to get done. Obviously, and probably your listeners might not know this, but even though the Federal Trade Commission governs it federally, each state has their own regulations around franchising.
Right.
Some states, literally, you finish your documents and you could sell it. You could start selling a franchise the next day. I live in Pennsylvania. That's one of those states, right? Just boom, boom, you can start selling. Then there's another kind of state. Let's say it's Florida. Florida is pretty easy. You finish your documents. They send them over to the Attorney General's office at the state of Florida. And in about 2 to 4 weeks, boom, stamp of approval, and you can start selling. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's other states we call registration states, which
Mm-hmm.
means that can take another 3 to 6 months to get approval to sell in that state. So as you have those conversations, find out what state you're in. Are you
Mm-hmm.
in a move quick? Are you in a small pause like Florida? Or do you have to wait a little longer, like let's say New York or California or Illinois? And so because of that, that's a really important piece of information to know as you start out. And we'll
Yeah.
help educate people about that as well.
Right. And I know this is also something that I think is a little bit of a pet peeve for you as well, as far as people assuming that it is easy. Franchising is. What would you say to those business owners that believe that it's just an automatic, it just means you're successful, fast success?
Let's put it this way. If you or that person that we're talking about that owns a business, if you started that business and it became successful in a couple of months, God bless you, because you are one of the rare, 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 rare gems on the earth. We all know that when you start your own business, it takes a long time to get customers and followers and loyal customers, right? Repeat customers. And so, whatever that case may be, I don't care if you're like cutting people's lawns or you're serving people dinner or you're taking care of someone's kids with daycare, right? It doesn't matter. And so, whatever it is, you're going to have to put in the hard work. It doesn't just come just like that. Not only do you get your legal documents together, but then you got to decide, okay, what's my selling strategy? And there's a couple of things to go at. And this is what I say. If you're a retail operation, you have customers coming in every single day.
Mm-hmm.
You should put it up on your website, put it up on your social media sites, put signs in your window that say we're franchising. You're a restaurant, put it on the placemats, staple it to the to-go bags, whatever the case may be. And so advertise yourself, use your own vehicles to advertise that you're franchising. Because I'm sure you've found this out too, that in many cases, the first couple of franchisees might actually end up being the customers that you have because they know what your brand is and they love your brand. And to be blunt, you don't have to go through all this education of trying to educate them about the brand because they have experienced your brand firsthand.
Mm-hmm.
And that sometimes that's the easiest way to start. But you and I know it's a long haul. It's not easy, and you bring
Mm-hmm.
in people like yourself, like a franchise consultant that helps
Mm-hmm.
help uncover those leads and vet those leads. Because let's be honest, not every lead is equal.
Yeah.
That is, do they fit into the culture? Whether that is, do they have financial capability? Whether they
Right.
have the skill set or the experience to do that. And so there's a lot of things that go through that kind of filter to determine
Mm-hmm.
whether or not somebody's going to be a good leader and a potential franchisee.
Yeah.
All of that
Yeah.
takes time. And so I always tell everybody, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint.
Right.
But put your goals in place, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and just strive everything and build your plan to achieve your goals.
Mm.
The great thing is there's people like us at SMB Franchise Advisors that help you get started and keep it, get it going and get everything in place. Then there's
Mm-hmm.
people like yourself, and there's other, broker networks and consultant networks that help them bring in leads.
Mm-hmm.
Sales groups that literally take over an entire process for you if that's something that you want, as a business owner.
Mm-hmm.
But there's all sorts of different ways to extend and expand your opportunities. You just got to know upfront what those look like, what those costs are, and what the time frame could look like, because it's not a short-term thing. It's a long-term strategy.
Yeah. And let's just jump back a little bit on that readiness. So before a business could even consider a franchise, what should they make sure of? What are the key factors that make a business franchise ready?
A couple of things I would say is almost like a checklist, right? That I would have
Mm-hmm.
that I'd go through with somebody. First of all, have you trademarked your name?
Mm,
Okay. Some people have really creative names that they come up with, okay? And some people have very vanilla type of names. You want to make sure that you trademark it. And the reason why is because when you got one or two locations, Tamika, nobody cares. Okay. But when you start adding 5, 10, 15, 20 locations in a metro area or up and down I-95 or I-75, in the United States, all of a sudden people are going to see, whoa, I think somebody might have infringed on my trademark and they're going to go and try and sue you. And if they win, guess what? You got to change your name.
wow.
It's fine when you got one or two locations, but when you got 40 or 50, you're not going to be happy. So that's one thing. That's the first step. Always make sure you trademark your name. The
Mm,
other thing is that I always say is, do you have systems and processes in place? So for
yes.
example, don't be using your Google Calendar to schedule appointments. No, no, no. You make sure that you've got some software and technology incorporated into your business, right? Whether that is online booking, whether that is invoicing, whether that is some sort of email communication, CRM, whatever the case is. I know it sounds kind of, oh, I don't need to do that. Oh, yes, you do. You
Yeah.
that system in place. And the reason why is because you've got to build something that can meet the torture test of, can this be duplicated?
Right.
I'm not around. So we're on the East Coast, you and I, but what happens if there was one in Austin, Texas? You can't be there all the time with that franchisee. And so
Mhm.
they've got to be able to have some technology and automation, if you want to call it, that they can duplicate that business very well. So whether that's POS systems, whether that is, like I said, invoicing, whether that is scheduling, whatever the case may be, depending on your business, make sure you have the technology and the software. And Tamika, there are so many software packages available out there that in some cases that are specific to a specific industry. So for example,
Yeah.
you're going to do remediation, right? People get a flood, you got to come and clean it up. There is literally software that is specifically for the remediation industry. So
Right.
there's something out there for sure. And so there's always something off the shelf that you can use and help kind of tweak it and customize it to your business. Have those things in place for sure.
Absolutely. So on that same token, let's talk about the biggest indicators that a business is not ready
Yeah.
to franchise.
Well, that's one, right? I'm going to flip over the coin what I just said, right? Is you don't have
Right.
systems and processes in place. So, listen, I'm not saying that you've got to have an operating manual of 100 pages already written out. Most
Mm-hmm.
people, you know where that is? In somebody.
Mm-hmm.
Our job on our team is to get it out of your head, extract it out of your head, and put it on paper. Okay. But anything that you can do to document your processes and procedures,
Mm-hmm.
you rewind the clock about 4 or 5 years ago, right? COVID hit us and nobody had a cleaning policy.
Mm-hmm.
All of a sudden, everyone had to put a cleaning policy in place, right? Whether that you were a restaurant, whether you were, childcare, whether you the airlines, whatever it was, everybody had to put a cleaning policy in place. And so, I always tell everybody, you're gonna laugh at me, but like send yourself an email, get a post-it, set, do a Word document. Just start to document what are the things that you do all day long in a certain situation. So for
Yeah.
example, we'll use a restaurant, right? Someone comes in, how is that person greeted? How do they take the order? How do they process it? How does the order get communicated to the kitchen in the back? Then once that's ready, how does it get packaged and given and you charge the person, the customer for the dinner or the lunch? And how does that get communicated? What does that package look like? So all those steps, think about all those steps that you go through and just kind of bullet it out and document it.
Like an SOP, like,
Yes,
just really
exactly.
start putting the SOPs together,
That's exactly right. Well stated. Standard operating procedures. Put those together. They don't have to be perfect. We'll help you, but put them down because it gives you a good start. That's
Mm,
something that, to your point, that's something that I look and I go, whoa, some people just do not have that in place.
mm-hmm.
The other thing is too that I would say is that you also have to work yourself out of a job.
Right.
And what I mean by that is I ask this question of a lot of people and I say, what percentage of the time are you working in the business, working on the business? Okay. In the business is you're making the pizza and the sauce in the back.
Mm-hmm.
On the business is you're handling the accounting and the marketing. Okay. And that's very different than kneading the dough and making the pizzas. And so if you're spending a large percentage of your time making the dough and making the sauce and making the pizzas, you're probably not ready to franchise.
Right.
People think they are, but they're not because you got to elevate yourself. You've got to elevate yourself out of that. You have to
Mm-hmm.
hire people to take over those roles so that you can take on the role of visionary
Right.
and leader of the franchise. And that's something else that I think, people think that they're ready and they're just not quite ready because they're still doing rather than
Mm-hmm.
directing.
Yeah.
Big
Yeah.
difference between doing and directing.
Yeah. Another thing is like, can you step out of business? Like if you can take a trip, a month, and come back, like, would you be worried, or is it to the point of where it's running? Like, can you step
Exactly.
away?
I always
That's
say to me, guy, I sometimes it's funny. It's a great question because I always ask people, I go, when was the last time you took a vacation?
that's a good one.
And they'll go, well, oh, no, 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 no. I said, I'm talking about a real vacation. I'm talking about, now listen, I realize we're all connected, okay? So, and I realize that, we got kids and sometimes, we need to make sure that things are going on with the kids or the family or the mom or the dad or whatever. I said, I get that, okay? I said, but I'm talking about you go on vacation, you go to the beach, and you don't have to check your phone. You check it when you get up in the morning and you check it maybe just before you go to dinner. And that's it. You're not on the phone from the beach all day long handling problems. If you can't do that, you're probably not ready.
Mm,
So that's your point. That's a good point. If you went on
hmm
vacation, right, exactly, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, would you come back to disarray? Everything be okay? And if you say everything's gonna be okay, you might be ready.
Maybe.
But it's hard for people.
Yeah, it is.
It's
It
hard.
is.
But if you know what you got to do, and I always tell people when they start out with us, I'm like, it's okay if you're working in the business a little bit, okay? But in the next 6 months, you need to transition yourself. You need to hire
Right.
a general manager. You need to hire an operations person. You need to hire people to take on those roles that you normally play day to day, so that you can elevate yourself. So you don't. I'm not saying you have to be elevated and out of the business, working on the business 100%
Uh-huh.
of the time when I have a conversation with you. That's not true. But in
Hmm.
about 6 months, you have better put a transition plan in place.
Yeah, I
Because if
agree.
not, you're going to get sucked back in, and that's a really good segue to what have I seen that when people have franchised, what has been the pitfalls of their
Hmm.
demise? And
That's a
one of
good
them
one.
is that people get sucked back in. Somebody calls in sick.
Yeah.
Somebody gets, something happens where somebody quits, and you got to jump in. You got to make the pizzas. You can't do that. You got to have staff to do that. Because if
Mm.
you get sucked back into the vortex, you're never going to get out. It's like quicksand.
Mm.
Get back out of it again. And so that's what I've seen a lot. The other thing that I see too is that people think that they know everything.
Mm.
I always have a funny joke. I always say when you're in your 20s, you think you know everything. When you're in your 30s, you think you have to know everything because you're like, oh, I should know everything in my 30s. When you get to your 40s, you think to yourself, I'm really good at this, but I'm not so good at these other things. And you know what? I'm going to fill in those weaknesses or areas of void. I'm going to fill in those gaps with people and resources. And when you get to that level of being able to like trust people and put
Mm-hmm.
people in those roles in those areas that you're not so good at. So maybe you're not great with numbers. So guess what? You hire an accountant to do the numbers.
Right.
Maybe you're not great with HR. Guess what? You hire somebody else to do all the HR stuff to deal with all the employee issues, right? Because maybe you just not good at that. And that's okay. Just know what you're good at, know what you're not good at, and fill in the gaps with people and resources. And what I find is that people who do that are successful. People who don't and think that only they can do all those things,
Yeah.
it's the demise of their business and their franchise. They will not be successful.
I think in any business, whether it's a
That's
franchise or not.
You're
Yeah.
right.
That's
It'd
a
be any
great point.
business.
It's a great point. So talking about let's talk about the process of actually franchising. What does the actual process of franchise look like?
Yep.
And just walk us through the key stages from like idea to implementation.
Yep.
And we already discussed like the time it may take, but let's dig into it a little bit.
Yeah, what we do, the first thing that I would say is that we do like almost like a brand discovery call. And we want to understand everything about the brand.
Mm-hmm.
What's your goals? Who's your target customer right now? Who's your target franchisee? What does that avatar look like? What is your mission, vision, culture? Some people have never documented those things or ever thought about those kind of things, Tamika. Those are
Mm-hmm.
so critical because you know what? It's going to help define who you bring in as a franchisee, and it will also help define who they are then going to bring in as employees. Because let's face it, it's that whole kind of domino effect of you want everybody on the same page,
Mm-hmm.
everybody to have that kind of same outlook, glass half full, customer services that, customer's always right, whatever those cases might be on a cultural perspective. And so we can help people with that if they've not done that. But that's a really good process in the beginning is understanding all that. The
Mm-hmm.
second step is really we start to build on the legal documents because that's the first thing, right? Get all that legal document together. And like I said, that takes about 3+ months where we understand all those different components about your financial performance and your startup costs of what it's going to cost to somebody to start up a franchise, a business just like the one that you currently have. And that takes about 3 months, like we said. And then we move into like the marketing aspect. What I mean by that is building marketing materials to help you sell your franchise. So whether that's signs in your restaurant or in your retail location, or whether that is social media posts or what on your website, content around franchising. So anything that would be franchise facing to the customers and to the world about
Mm-hmm.
your franchise brand and what it has to offer. And then the third thing we'll do is, and we'll be doing this for quite a long time, for about 6 to 8 months, is building you an operating manual. So as we talked about, putting in all those SOPs, right? As I describe it, from the moment you put the key in the door in the morning to open up the business, to put your key in the door at night and lock up the door and close
Mm-hmm.
down the business, what is everything that you do all throughout the day that has to be documented on how to run that business. We'll help you. We'll extract it from your head. But also, if you got anything written down, that's great. That takes about 6 to 8 months to document all that. Those manuals, those operating manuals, which is a requirement, by the way, from the FTC.
Mm-hmm.
Those are about 2 to 350 pages, depending on your concept. So they're not a small document. It's a pretty robust document, and that's a good thing because, as I always say, when you go on vacation and one of your franchisees asks you a question, instead of texting back the answer, just say, "Look in section 5.2 of the operating manual. It'll tell you how to do it." So that's why you want it to be a comprehensive manual. And then the final thing is now you got everything packaged up, right? Your legal documents are all packaged. You're ready to go. Your operating manual is all packaged. You got your marketing materials, and now you're ready to sell. And that's when, you decide, are you going to try it on your own? You're going to bring in some broker consultants. You're going to bring in a sales group. What is that going to look like? And like I mentioned, that takes about 10 to 12 months to get all that together. But we also challenge people to think about all of that early on too. Don't just think about at the end how I'm going to sell. Because if you
Mm-hmm.
end up using a consultant network, a franchise broker network, you're going to want to know that up front because you're going to want to build that into your
Budget
franchise,
that.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
budget for it. Exactly. So, and that's something else too that we talk to people about is budgeting, about, what are the kind of dollars you're going to have to spend? Because listen, let's be blunt. This is another debunked myth. Oh, franchising's cheap. I can do that because everybody else is going to be picking up the tab. No, not the case. You have got to go out there and get those franchisees, right, to sign on. And so it takes a lot of work, blood, sweat, and tears, as they say, but also dollars and effort. And so you got to put some cash away to be able to do that. You'll be bringing in cash. Trust me, once they get up and running and you got the royalties coming in, you'll be bringing in cash. But you got to invest. Just like if you were going to open up another location, you're investing in your future, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of the process that I would say that we take people through. It takes roughly about 10 to 12 months to do all that. And then, as we say, then it's on the franchise journey. It's to kind of sell your franchises.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something, and you've done this many times too, is when that franchisor sells that first franchise, it is such a rush of somebody's actually believing in you and what you've created and wants to duplicate it somewhere. And it's
Nice.
pretty awesome. Getting that first one is never easy, but once you get that first one, the next ones come a little sooner, a little faster.
Mm,
Because
mm.
that first one is always the toughest one, right? Um, it's never, like I said, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
Yeah. And so, you know what? Just touching on that, as far as can you touch on what some of those common obstacles that they may face in the early stages of becoming a franchisor?
Yeah, I think some of the common obstacles are, like I mentioned, you think you know it all.
Mm,
You don't want to bring in other people. You're like, I can handle this. I got to do this all myself. The one thing to remember is the business that you're running, restaurant, childcare, senior care, whatever the case is, right? Fitness,
hmm
whatever you're running, you're an expert in that industry because you have helped to build it, right? You've seen it from the ground up. You've made changes, you've made mistakes, you've adjusted, you've pivoted, you've done whatever you need to do, but you've become successful.
hmm
When you become a franchisor, you are now in an entirely different industry.
Yep.
We're in the franchise industry. You're not in the business of making burgers anymore. You're not in the business of taking care of somebody's kids. You are now in the business of franchising. It is a completely different industry. There's rules, regulations, and compliance. There's all sorts of processes you got to understand. There's knowledge that's going to be, I mean, it's like literally being thrown into the deep end of the pool with no life preserver, and you got to learn how to swim.
Mm,
That's okay because there are people there helping you hold you up, right? And hand you the
yeah.
life preservers and help you. But to your point, that's one of the obstacles that I find is that people think it's going to be easy. Another one is that they don't resource appropriately. And
Yeah.
number three is they think they're going to do it all themselves.
hmm
And listen, as I talked about earlier, the more evolved human you are and know what your gaps are and bring in people and resources to fill them in, the better success you'll have. But those
Yeah.
are things that I say about the obstacles.
Yeah, and I know we touched on some of the legal and financial considerations a little bit. Are there anything else that you can touch on as far as what they need to be aware of before they begin the franchising process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, there's, for example, if you're bringing a consulting firm like us, you'd have that expense. You're going to have the franchise attorney's expense to drop all the legal papers.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have expenses specifically about updating your website, printing off brochures to staple to the bags when the carryouts go out, signs in your window, that sort of stuff. You'll also have, for example, there are franchise trade shows,
Mm-hmm.
conferences. There's
Mm-hmm.
one in New York that's the biggest conference of all year. Um, it's in the Javits Center in Manhattan. And
Yeah, I was just there, guys. You
there you
missed
go.
me. I was
That was
on
there
that
in June,
session.
right? And so that conference, what people do is they buy booth space, right? And there's a booth, rows of booths, and there's all these people selling their concepts, selling their franchises, and people come through that Javits Center with the idea of they want to buy a business, but they're not sure what they want to buy. And
Mm-hmm.
so sometimes they'll think I want to be in the restaurant business, or sometimes I want to be in childcare, or that sort of thing. And other times, honestly, Tamika, they have no clue. And they're just kind
Mm-hmm.
of looking to see what kind of business opportunities are there. Those are the
Right.
people who are like, you know what? I want to own my own destiny and I want to be my own boss, but I'm not sure how I want to get there. That's where you come in to help them educate them about where they can go and what are the options, right? And so those kind of things that they have to prepare for. So it's those kind of costs. The upfront cost, I would say, in about the first 12 months, you probably should have in your head about $100,000 you're going to be spending
Mm,
between a consulting firm, between the lawyers, between updating your website and those kind of things. It's about $100,000, I would say, to franchise your business properly.
mm.
Anybody else tells you it's less than that, I'd be a little suspect. There's a lot of things to do. And so keep that in mind, but you don't need the money like all today.
Right.
Money over like a 12-month period. And then what I also
Okay.
say is, after that period, you probably need about I would say about a $250,000, $250,000 over the next 3 years to invest back into the franchise.
Mm.
Whether that is bringing on broker networks, bringing on sales groups, bringing on anyone to help you sell, or hiring employees, that sort of thing to help you on your corporate staff to help the franchisees. I would say it's about $250,000 over the next 3 years or so. So, it's not a small investment, but when you think about opening 2, 3, or 4 locations more, it's probably less expensive than that. Let somebody
Mm.
else take on the responsibility of opening up the next location while you become the mentor and the coach.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. So let's talk a little bit about the FDD, right?
Okay.
So FDD, franchise disclosure documents. So let's talk about what role it plays as far as making sure that how important is it to have a solid FDD and the role that it will play in protecting both the franchisor and the franchisee.
Yes. First of all, the lawyers will look at that document as a legal document, and they are absolutely right from the definition of it. Okay. But to be perfectly frank with you, I can use that joke one time. Perfectly frank with you, you and I, we look at it a little differently. We look at it as a selling tool. And the reason why is because the only information that you're unable to share about your business has to be in that document. So for example, I mentioned some of the things earlier, right? It's about 200 pages long, right? And obviously we'll have a lot of background in there around your
Mhm,
trademark and around your brand and all sorts of things like that. But it'll also have really pivotal information that franchisee needs to know, right? One is who are the officers? Who's going to be the leadership team? Those got to be listed with some bios. Number two is if I'm going to buy one of these, how much is it going to cost me? So everything from construction to startup to computers to furniture to marketing, spend with a grand opening. What are all those different costs that go into me opening up that business? And so
mhm.
you really want to have a good range for somebody. It's not like it's going to cost you $5 or $1,000,000. I mean, big range, okay? But maybe it's somewhere between 750 and 900,000 or a million or something. Give a little bit, a couple of thousand leeway, right? Somebody's got to know what's the range it's going to cost me, right? Because they got to be able to plan for that, whether they have the
Mhm,
money or whether they got to get a loan or that sort of thing. That's really important. Another key thing in there, which is important for everybody, is the fee structure. When I say fee structure, there's a number of fees that you charge as a franchisor where you make money, and obviously the franchisee pays those fees because that's what they do to pay fees to get support, because you're going to guide
mhm,
them and support them and help them throughout their journey, right? And those fees are a franchise fee, which is the initial check that they write when they sign sign the agreement and become a franchisee, and that's usually in the range of $30,000 to $50,000 in the industry. So 30
mhm,
to 50. And the reason why they're in that range is because you might end up using a portion of that franchise fee to pay the sales group or pay the franchise consultant, the broker, if they
mhm,
get to lead. Then the
mhm.
other fee, and I'm going to sound like Kevin O'Leary on Shark Tank, like I want $1 for every one of those sold. It's a royalty, right? So you're going to get a percentage of the gross sales, not the
Mhm,
net, the gross top line. You're going to get a percentage. So if it's $1,000,000, and let's say your royalty is 8%, you just got $80,000 over the year that you're going to get from that particular franchisee. And then there's also another fee called a brand fund. That brand fund is literally money that you use as a franchisor. You get it from the franchisees to help you with your overall marketing efforts for the brand, your website, manage your social media, maybe pay for a marketing person on the team's salary
mhm.
or an advertising agency. But you got to put it back into the business. You can't put it back in your pocket.
Right.
So when you add the two together, it's about 10% of the gross sales that you as a franchisor would get from that franchisee. And that doesn't sound like a lot when it's one franchisee, but when it's 20, 30, 40, 50, 75 franchisees, that's a substantial amount of money coming in on a weekly basis.
Yeah.
So that fee
Yeah.
structure is really important. And the other thing is that I would say that's another key thing is territory. People want a piece of the earth. Why? Because they want a protected territory so that the franchisor is not going to sell another location or another franchise 2 miles down the road.
Right.
Because then you got them fighting for customers. And so people want a piece of the earth. And usually what that means is It's a territory that's usually typically it's designed based on population and a combination of population and miles. So you might have a 10-mile radius, put a dot in the middle where the location is going to be in a 10-mile radius. And
Mm-hmm.
let's say in that 10-mile radius, it's 300,000 people. That might be the territory that you'll sell. And so you can't sell another territory within that 10-mile radius or that 300,000 population. You got to sell it next door where they don't touch. And so then this way, every person gets a protected territory. It's not a guarantee that you got to offer that. Many don't have those, but it's something that people value because they don't
Mm-hmm.
want you selling another franchise 2 miles down the road.
Yeah.
And the final thing I would say is, and you mentioned this up front, about you had a conversation with George from our team about I'm 19, and that
Mm-hmm.
it's a financial representation of how much someone could make. Notice I said representation, not guarantee.
Yes.
But that question, that first question someone's going to ask you is, Tamika, how much can I make if I open one of these? And if you don't have a financial representation in that FDD, you can't talk about it because if you do, you broke the law.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important. I will tell you though, our finance team, including George, are so savvy. And what I mean by that is in that section, it doesn't mean that you just have to have a P&L. Here's your
Mm-hmm.
top line gross sales. Here's my expenses. Here's my cost of goods, that sort of thing. And you come down to it, a net profit. It isn't just that. You can actually put in other metrics. So for example, let's say you're a business that does cleaning and you do residential cleaning and you do commercial cleaning. Instead of just putting the top line that I made $1 million, maybe you have another chart in there that talks about your residential percentage versus your commercial percentage. And maybe there's another chart that talks about the number of customers that you've had year over year. So maybe you saw revenue grow from 1 million to 1.5 million, okay? But your customers grew from, I'm going to make this up, from 500 to 550, okay? And people are like, wow, you made $500,000 with those other 50 customers? No, but if you ended up increasing the customers from a commercial basis versus a residential basis, the commercial is worth more.
Mm.
Maybe you got more new commercial ones that caused your revenue to go so high, right? So it's really looking at those different kind of metrics that
Mm-hmm.
you can put in there that are not always a dollar financial, but it could be number of customers. It could be a difference between residential and commercial. It could be a lot of different other kind of metrics that you can communicate to somebody of the success of your brand. So that's really important because I don't think it's just about the dollars. Yes, everybody wants to know the dollars. Everybody wants to know also, how did you increase from 23 to 24? What were those things that you did? Or how did you expand your business? Maybe you started out as residential and then you added on commercial. Okay, so you see
Right.
there it's largely residential, but the next year you're more like 70-30 with commercial and residential, right? So it's really looking at those different key metrics of performance that I think tells the whole story. And that's something that I will applaud our finance team. They're really awesome at, Tamika, is like thinking out of the box about it's not just about the gross sales that someone makes,
Mm-hmm.
it's other key performance metrics. And that's really important.
Yeah. And you know what I want to touch on is once you franchise, because this is something else that I don't think um, business owners think about as well, is the support,
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk about what kind of support
Yeah.
should a franchisor provide to their franchisees to ensure success?
Well, let's put it this way. I think the support is in 3 different categories.
Mm,
One is pre-opening. So before they even open up that location, right, you're going to coach them and support them on construction, on location, the rental agreement. You're going to approve all that. Obviously, they'll
mhm,
go out and search for real estate options and rental agreements and that sort of thing with a real estate agent.
mhm,
But you're going to help. You're going to approve it, and you're going to help guide them, right? You're
mhm,
going to want it like in a heavy traffic strip mall, or you're going to want it to be a standalone building, like whatever the case may be. So it's that kind of that pre-opening support. You'll also help connect them with all of the vendors and the suppliers. You'll make sure that all of their opening inventory is prepared. So if you're a restaurant, obviously you got to have food, in your restaurant. If you're something else, if you're a daycare, well, guess what? You got to have beds and you got to have playground equipment. You got to have all sorts of things, right? So yeah, you got to help them on the pre-opening support to get them all set up and make sure that they're ready. The other thing is too is you're going to put them through a training program. You're going to set up a training program. We can help you create that agenda. Of what does that training program look like? Everything from marketing, the sales piece, the interaction with customer service, the admin and the accounting. How do you run that business? And you're going to put them through a training session. And if it's flipping burgers and making burgers, you're going to teach them how to flip burgers and make burgers, like whatever that particular business is. And so that's all pre-opening. Then once they start to like open up and they're starting to get running, right? Then you're going to support them on the ongoing efforts of like, how do they track their business? How do they see if they're being successful? How did their customer count increase over the next 4 weeks after opening and the next 6 months after opening? And so, and not obviously, and look at what items were selling the most, right? Was it certain items in the food? Was it burgers versus chicken sandwiches versus shakes versus kids meals, that sort of thing. And so you'll be able to help them with some metrics to be able to assess their performance and coach them as you go along. And also marketing efforts, right? If you're the franchisor, you open up even one or two locations, you know what you did when you opened them up, and you know what successes look like, right? Did you advertise in these certain areas? Did you go to churches to advertise? Did you go to farmers markets like that? I'm just saying all sorts of different things that people have done that are successful. Let's be honest, if you're selling a daycare, maybe you somehow get in with the school systems, right? So that those parents understand that there's something there after school for their kids. And so there's all sorts of different ways that you can continue to market yourself. And I call that the launch period of like support. And then there's the long-term period, right? So now you're a franchisee and you're running this business for 3, 5 years, et cetera. Yes, you've got a good handle on the business. You've been successful, but how do you take that business to the next level? Franchisor, you've got to help them to get over that hump of just being happy with a $500,000 revenue per year. How do you get them to $1 million? And so that becomes your next, I'll call it, phase of coaching and support, right? Is how do you get them past that plateau to take them to the promised land of getting to $1 million or getting to 2 million or whatever that case may be, right? And so there's that 3 levels of coaching per se: pre-opening, I call it the launch phase, and then kind of the long-term phase. And you got to be there. And yes, sometimes, they're going to call you to gripe and cry and be bummed out, but you got to also be the motivator. You got to be the shoulder they cry on, but you got to be the motivator that kicks them in the butt and keeps them going. So that's what a franchisor is. You're a leader, you're a coach, you're a mentor, you're a supporter, you're a guider. That's what I tell everybody. I go, and if those roles are not something that you desire, don't do it, because that's what it's going to be. But
I love it.
It's a great feeling when you see those franchisees really blossom and become so successful. And guess what? If they become successful, Tamika, they're probably going to want to buy another location.
Yeah. Then you have some multi-unit owners.
Multi-unit owners, right? Exactly.
Awesome. That was great. So now I want to talk about, well, you've worked with brands in a variety of industries. So when should a franchisor consider expanding internationally? And what additional challenges come with taking that brand goal?
That's a good question. I always say that, the lack of another term, but start close to home, right?
Yeah.
Always start wherever you are. Let's say you're in Orlando, Florida. Orlando, Florida is the bullseye, and start out from that bullseye, right? So as you start to go from Florida to Georgia, to the Southeast, to the Southwest, to the Midwest, to the East Coast, that sort of thing. And once you kind of get to a point where you think that you're in good place in the United States, I'm not saying you're in every market sold. I'm not saying that, okay? But you're in a good foothold, and you're on a good trajectory for growth, and you think that you want to go elsewhere. Here's the thing, a couple of things to think about. One is what I said in the beginning, close to home. Sometimes it's easier to go to Canada than it is to go to Africa or the Middle East, right? And so those kind of situations are something that you got to think about. The other thing is you've got to now understand the different laws that are applicable in different countries. So just because we've done it in the US here in this way, doesn't mean that it can be done the exact same way somewhere else. Now, I will say we tend to have some of the tougher laws. So it's probably not as stringent in other countries, but they might have nuances based on their cultures that might be different. And so you're going to have to learn about those different cultural, and you have to learn about those different legal, scenarios that are required when you franchise into a different country. So it isn't impossible to do, obviously. Of course, it's possible. I mean, McDonald's is global everywhere, right? but you got to take those steps very carefully. The
Mm-hmm.
other thing is too is you want to make sure it's probably even more important that that first franchisee in that foreign country is going to be successful because you can't be there all the time to help them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you live in Orlando and the first franchisee is in Tampa, that's only an hour plus drive. You're good. But if you're in Orlando and your first international is in Dubai, you can't be
Mm-hmm.
in Dubai all the time. And so you really got to make sure that that first franchisee is the right one, fits into your culture, and is going to be able to achieve it. So I always applaud people that want to go international. I think it's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
I always say start at home close. What I mean by that is the United States, then go to Canada, maybe go to Mexico, South America, because there's a lot of similarities with the South American countries and their cultures, specifically when you're talking about our southern, like Texas and Florida and
Mm-hmm.
Georgia. Those countries have like, a lot of different similar cultures with some of the people in our states, and so those are sometimes the easier ones to do. Um, don't forget too, you're gonna have everything translated.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing too. So there's some expenses involved in that, but it can be pretty amazing and exhilarating to like now be part of a different country and culture.
Yeah. So you know what? So as we start wrapping up, this was great.
Thank
I'm
you.
glad we did this.
Me too.
What final thoughts or advice do you have for anyone looking to build wealth and opportunity by expanding through franchising?
A couple of things I would say is first, assess your brand, see and identify what's the uniqueness, what's the key differentiators versus your competitors. And to be blunt, Tamika, you should do that. Not you, but the business should do that anyway, even if you're not going to franchise, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because those are the things that you should be shouting from the rooftop. Here's why my brand is different and why you should come here and buy from my brand or buy my brand, right? That's one thing. Make sure that you do that no matter what. The second thing is I think it's building that mission, vision, culture and instilling that into your current operation because those are going to be something that you're going to want to permeate through the franchisees and through all of their employees as well. And so and the bedrock of those is really important. I will tell you, and this is just an example, but we had one franchisor came to us, we helped build them a franchise, and they did not have mission, vision, culture, none of that, okay? And or core values or anything. And I was talking to them at the New York trade show, and they said, Frank, oh my gosh, I'm so glad that you came here. And I said, why? And they said, because you kept telling us about this culture and core values and everything. And I said, yeah. And they said, we would have people coming up to us, our employees, and saying, we want a raise. And we're like, okay, let's have a conversation about your performance. And we didn't really have anything to anchor it on.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when we have that discussion, we go back to the core values. We go back to the culture and we measure people against the core values and the culture and the mission and the vision and see how did people perform against those things to demonstrate whether or not you deserve a raise. If you do, what does that raise look like? And that sort of thing. Because it's not just about now a subjective kind of conversation about, I did this, I did this, I did this, give me a raise. But it's more about, here are the key values that we value in our corporation or in our franchise. And here's how you measured up. I want you to do a self-assessment and measure up. And so that foundation of that mission, vision, core value, culture, all of that stuff that people think is a little fluffy, it's really not. It's really foundational and really important. And the final thing I would say is, and I said this earlier, is systems, processes, technology, software.
Yeah.
Make sure you've got that in place because the big key question you're going to ask yourself, or I'm going to ask you, is can you duplicate this business? Can you be gone on vacation and it run without you? Or can someone open up a location in Miami and you're located in Detroit and it's going to be okay?
Mm-hmm.
Those are the three big things.
All right. Well, once again, thank you so much, Frank, for appearing today with us on Franchise Vibes. And, it was everything that I hope it would be. So I
Well,
really appreciate it.
thank you for inviting me. I was appreciate our partnership and thank you because you know what? It's really about, like I said, it's really about helping people achieve
Yeah.
wealth, achieve their dream. That's what it's all about.
All right. You heard it here, guys. So if anyone is interested in learning more, please feel free to reach out. And until the next time, which by the time this air would be next year. So happy New Year's, I should be saying to everyone.
Happy New Year.
Thank you, and thank you again for joining us on Franchise Lives. Until the next time, everybody.
I know.
Bye.